We have Dumebi Oluwole here. She's manager with financial derivatives, but I mean, she deals a whole lot with the economy and should help us understand all of this.
Yes.
Dumebi, Venezuela is very far away from us, and so is the United States, but our revenue is based on oil, and all of these people are all connected to oil. So I guess Nigeria doesn't have a choice but to show concern and know what's going on.
Yes, you're very right in that, and I do understand the sentiment. So of course, like you had rightly mentioned, there's an entire spat going on right now, the global economy and how that is impacting crude oil prices. So I think it's important that we contextualize all of these countries and what exactly is going on, starting with Venezuela. So Venezuela is one of those many countries that resource rich, especially with crude oil. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves. I mean, they have oil reserves higher than Saudi Arabia, which is the highest global.
I think they have 300 billion.
Yes. Now, proven oil reserves. Now, beyond the oil reserves that they have, the quality of their crude is very thick, right? And one of the best you'd find globally, right? What this means is that there's a lot of demand for that kind of crude, right? Especially because of the byproducts you can get from it. It's not limited, right, as such. You now also contextualize Venezuela in the global and international landscape, right? One of those countries that are experienced sanctions on how much of their crude they can sell, right? They're experiencing sanctions across so many other aspects, and it's one of the countries that you'd find that saying, where they're saying their rule of law, or so to say, they have been run by, I would say, an autocratic government, so to say. And based off of that, you're seeing sanctions follow suit. I would say another example of a country that has experienced such, sanctions based off of crude oil, and another example with gold, you see Libya in one of those cases, and another country, Zimbabwe, right, which is for gold. Now, what these sanctions do based off of maybe they are not following the rule of law for democracy, or so to say, what that means is that the country is limited in how much revenue they can generate.
All right, maybe please just pause on your thoughts, and we'll continue on that, because we have to lead our DSTV viewers now to the FCT Minister, Mr. Nyesom Wike. We know he's been doing some rounds. I think he calls it a thank you visit to the local government, but this time he's going to visit the Speaker of the River State House of Assembly. So that's for our DSTV viewers. For other viewers on the other platform, please do stay with us here on Business Morning. And if you're on DSTV and you want to continue watching Business Morning, just go to YouTube and switch to the next platform, and you'll be right here with us. Dumebi, I hope I didn't buy you away. Okay, please go ahead.
So I've contextualized Venezuela, right? Then we look at the U.S. Trump has been on an entire, spree of wanting to reduce oil prices. That has been a huge mandate of his because of the expectation that when oil prices reduce, gasoline prices reduce, and inflation reduces,
and interest rates will reduce.
And so based off of that cycle, he has been on that spree to reduce oil prices. In fact, if you remember, in 2025, literally he told OPEC to increase oil production, right? So we're seeing him move in that regard. Now, we have gotten to a point where we're seeing a lot more, and like I think I said this on Friday, where we're seeing a lot more politics, really drive the macroeconomy. And to be very honest, that's what a lot of economists right now are pricing in terms of the commodities market and the broader macroeconomy. With this, we are seeing three things. Number one, resource imperialism. Now, the news going around today is that 30 to 50 million barrels of crude oil are going to be taken from the U.S. and taken from Venezuela by the U.S.
And Russia is guarding that. But maybe, sorry, you're going to continue. You know, when I saw that story, I think it's like late yesterday, between 30 and 50 million barrels, and I'm like, so the president is in the custody of the United States with his wife.
Yes.
Okay, we have a sitting president now. I don't know if I'm allowed to call her the vice president now, who has agreed to work with the U.S. And now we have the U.S. boldly telling us how they have an agreement with Venezuela to take about 30 to 50. What's the agreement? I think this morning there's a story saying that Venezuela will get some U.S. products in exchange for that. Who's taking care of the people of Venezuela? Who's speaking for them? If we know that the acting president now, she's doing it to make the U.S. happy, the main president is in custody, and then one country, which is the United States, goes into another country and boldly has an agreement to take their resource. And President Trump has not hidden the fact that he's interested in Venezuelan oil.
Yes, I mean, it still boils down to what I was saying, resource imperialism. It's pretty much a dominant economy taking over resources of a smaller economy. That's just what it is. And the reason why I'm saying this is because this playbook is not any different than what has happened with Libya or what has happened with Zimbabwe when you look at their gold, right? Zimbabwe's story is pretty much more different, but the playbook and how the US has moved in this regard, it's not so different. It's not so different. When you really dig deep into the nuances of how these kinds of moves, you know, go on with dominant economies and how they come to resources, you know, just not to sound very deep, so to say, the core of it all is that we have seen the US boldly say, okay, this is what we want. We did this. This is what we've done to get this. Now, whether we like it or not, it's happening. Now, when we talk about who is taking care of the people of Venezuela, I think I will say this, that this is one of the situations where you're just going to watch and see how it eventually plays out. Reason being that we can't really say that this is exactly why the acting president is doing what she's doing. What if she's trying to just douse the situation down?
Stay in the good books of the US, that she stays in power.
Well, whether that might be the case, you know, whether that might be the case. I mean, it's not far-fetched. Politics, again, like I said, between 2024 and 2026, as of January that we're talking right now, politics right now has become a driving force in the macroeconomy. And not until we see how the political environment is moving, which this was quite unexpected, right? It was a huge, we saw some of the trends, you know, that, okay, this could likely be the case, but not exactly in this magnitude, where a sitting president is removed and kept in the custody of another country.
And
their resources are taken. And remember that between the US and China, there has been a lot of diplomatic issues, right? Diplomatic issues, resource issues, and those tensions, Venezuela also sits within that. Reason being that China was one of the biggest importers of Venezuelan crude. Now, with the blockade from the US to Venezuela, prices of Venezuelan crude has also increased. Between when the abduction, well, let's say abduction now, when the sitting president was taking off seat and today, the price of Venezuelan crude has actually increased by over 10 to 15%.
So it's now more expensive for China.
So it's now more expensive for China. And remember that I told you that Venezuelan crude is thick, very of high grade and of high quality. US refineries are built to refine such texture of crude oil. And right now, the US refineries, once they have access to that crude, the refineries are up and running. What that means that there will be an increase in production of refined petroleum resources or refined petroleum products. What that means that there's going to be an increase in supply. There's an increase in supply, prices fall. Beyond that is also an increase in supply of crude oil to the market, especially for the US. Because remember, beyond the US being an exporter of crude oil, one of the top, they are also a major consumer.
They are the biggest consumer.
Exactly. So if they have 30 to 50 million barrels already supplied to them, the refineries are running, demand is also softened, prices are likely to fall.
Their reserves are also, because this morning we saw that their crude stock depleted more than expected. Exactly. But maybe let's bring this home.
Yes.
You know, because when President Trump issued that, was it threats? And then subsequently we saw the
airstrikes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Nigerians themselves were divided to say, oh yes, our government is not taking care of us enough, so we don't mind the United States. And another arm, another group were saying, at what price would the United States
do this for Nigeria?
Exactly.
Yes.
Because President Trump will tell you that's what he's done with Venezuela.
Yes.
And United States dominates the United Nations, the World Bank, and all those. So who's going to stop the United States? So I wonder if this paints a picture of a probability of what may happen in Nigeria. I don't know what you've been hearing about that.
So, I mean, earlier in, late 2025, I did give a probability of a 60-40 chance of the US airstrikes actually happening. Some people thought I was being too dramatic, that, oh, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. But I mean, my 40% chance actually stood. It did happen. It just wasn't too shaken that the entire
but we
nation...
don't know what's in the works. So
but we don't know what's in the works.
Exactly.
But my point is, again, that the playbook is not... If you look deeper, you see that the playbook is not any different. With Nigeria, I will say this boldly, that there is a chance that there's some agreement for resource for defense. There is that chance. And it's not any different from what some other countries have done, whether with Russia or even with China, right? It's not out of the works for such an agreement to happen, especially when countries do not have the financial capacity to actually pay or get their own defense mechanisms, in place. I will say it's not far-fetched that this might be the case. It's not public, it's not very out there transparent for us to really know, but I will say that it's not too far-fetched for us to think that way. Now, there are two scenarios. The first scenario is that, and we have templates of this. Remember I mentioned Libya, and now Venezuela is another example. The template with Venezuela and Libya is that we have this resource dominance, right, from an outside party that begins to cripple the economy, because what happens now is our resource is no longer necessarily ours. And you have to consistently pay for every defense provided. A resource level has to go down. And what this means is that we have to be more strategic. But the second scenario is that, oh, this is done, Nigeria gets its, feet back up, insecurity is completely depleted, and now Nigerian, defense levels have increased. We have, there's good news going around in that light. The bad, well, not necessarily the bad news, but I would say the next scenario, which is more likely, right, is that we have our resources to some extent being paid, used to pay for, the defense being provided by the United States, and what that means is that there's less crude oil to be refined to the refineries that jump-started or were catalyzed earlier in 2025. Now, what this means is that we have to find another way to increase our crude oil production. Yeah. Now, what are we going to do then? So does that mean that more IOCs are going to come in? I doubt that. Reason being because there is the macro environment is not necessarily, or will I say, the geopolitical environment is not necessarily stable. So what does that mean for their future, right? What does that mean for their future? Now then, I think I would just say this simply, that there is this scenario that is likely to happen. And the downside to this is, number one, Nigeria's crude oil production level is not necessarily going to hit that over 2 million barrels that we're looking for. And then there's fiscal, slippage. We're having issues generating more revenue. And with issues generating more revenue, we're likely to look into more debt. But when you look at what has now happened with the monetary policy side of things, how investors have been happy with our, dollar bond issuance and then our euro bond issuance, likelihood of that is the financial strain might likely be, reduced, because it will be offset by investor confidence, being happy on the benefits that we've seen from the reforms.
Maybe let's not forget something we also mentioned on Tuesday, which is that this is the pre-election year.
Exactly.
We see election bells ringing everywhere, yes, and all of that. Yes. And the other thing is our solid minerals. Yes. We know some states, I believe Katsina also, they have to stop mining, yes, because of insecurity. Yes. And I don't know how much of it seeps into the government's official coffers. And these are the areas that may be targeted, when we talk about, we're using resource for defense and things like that. And, if the government would intentionally come into these agreements, that's on the one thing. But I mean, when another country now is controlling and dictating the facts, the terms, yes, the terms, exactly, then it becomes a whole lot of issues.
You're not wrong there, and I think our resources again has to be very much protected. I've always been an advocate for state governments actually becoming more comparative advantageous, so to say. Reason being that they take ownership of the commodities that are within their states and actually build on those commodities, increase production, be more attractive to investment. With this now, of course, there is that chance that insecurity, if it's not insecurity that is affecting their production, probably the airstrikes, disrupting, economic activities within those regions. And then there's that concern of state governments becoming even more dependent on FARC, right? And we've seen at least late 2025 where fact disbursements had declined because oil production as well. Sorry, oil production and oil prices were not exactly the way they were at the middle of the year or even earlier in the year. And what that means again for the people where the government is not necessarily able to meet up with salary payments consistently or as much as they would like. And remember, the tax reforms are also in place as well. So there is a lot of moving parts to it. And I think it's one of those situations where transparency and communication from the federal government to its people on what exactly is going on is extremely important. Why? Because, again, like you said, it's an election year, right? Or a pre-election year, rather. And people are already gearing up for what it's going to look like. So I will say that tensions are not necessarily tensions, but people are becoming more sensitive. And if the federal government does not communicate with people, or even their state governments do not communicate with people, and we're seeing more of political movements going around, what that means is that there is, towards the end of this 2026, most likely we'll see social tensions continue to brew up ahead of 2027. And that is a huge risk for businesses.
Major disruption.
Yes,
major
for businesses
disruption.
and investments.
So maybe we're almost out of time, but
yeah.
FDCC's December's inflation at 30%. And I was saying before the show came out, from 14.5% to 30%. That's a huge move.
Huge, yes. I mean, it's pretty much base effects. Nothing too much to worry about. Again, we're coming from a very, very low base as of December, last year, and a lot of the changes with the rebasing exercise. So we use the, December 2024 to start off a very beautiful trend of inflation numbers in 2025. So this December 2025 is going to tell us, okay, pretty much you started low, we're ending high. It's just basically base effects.
So it's just a year on
year, yes.
So but I think we can, if we measure November, December, that should give us a more realistic.
Of course, the month-on-month inflation trend. I think we did see that kind of take up in November, and pretty much it was explained. There's an increase in consumption, increase in demand, the festive period. Yes, and to be very honest, when you even consider the fact that certain commodities, the prices didn't overly spike. So what that means is that heading into the December month-on-month inflation numbers, even though it might increase, when you consider the fact that the Naira also kind of depreciated as well at that time, but pretty much it's just base effects. When we when we see the January numbers,
we'll see
it's more realistic. Yes,
hopefully. All right, maybe thank you so much for preparing us for that 30%, most likely 30% that we could get. Dumebi Oluwole is manager at Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.